I've often complained that most popular Christian books out there tend to be somewhat shallow and lightweight. Now, there's nothing wrong with lightweight reading, of course, but it does disappoint me that these are the books that are most popular. And I say that because we as Christians really should be challenging ourselves, studying diligently and mastering our subject matter. I don't wish to offend anyone, but I'd even go so far as to say that if a Christian book is flying off the shelves, if it's taking the Christian church by storm, then it's probably, or well, almost certainly, lacking in theological depth or theological accuracy, or both. The only exceptions that come to mind, in my judgment at least, are The Case for Faith and The Case for Christ, that whole series by Lee Strobel. And even those books are somewhat introductory level as far as apologetics go. Don't get me wrong, they're still fine books, and they are certainly quite deep compared to most of what you'll find in Christian bookstores nowadays. They certainly are challenging reading, even for a well-educated person, but they're still somewhat introductory level. In other words, I think we still need to study the faith and the basis for our faith more deeply. That's why I'd like to offer a book recommendation today. It's a recommendation I've made in the past, but I'd like to revisit it. I'm talking about the Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Dr. Gary Habermas and by Michael Licona. What Habermas and Licona did was take 4 facts that are strongly attested by history. In other words, 4 facts that virtually all New Testament scholars agree upon, and show that you can present a very solid case for the resurrection of Jesus Christ based on those 4 facts. When I talk about New Testament scholars, by the way, I'm not talking about Bible-believing Christians. The vast majority of scholars who study the New Testament are not believers. Many of them are atheists or skeptics of some other variety, and many of them do not believe that the resurrection ever occurred. And German scholarship, for example, is tremendously skeptical of the resurrection. And yet, even within skeptical scholarship, you'll find certain core facts that they all agree on, or virtually all agree on. I say virtually all because there's always the possibility of somebody, disagreeing despite the overwhelming opinion of everyone else. That happens when people are trying to make a name for themselves, or when they're trying to be contrarian, or trying to offer some revolutionary theory. So if I say that virtually everybody agrees when it comes to these 4 facts, and I'll discuss those facts in a moment, plus a 5th fact that they throw in, and show how you present a solid case for the resurrection based on those facts. By the way, notice what I'm doing here. A casual skeptic, a lay person, might say something like, "The resurrection? No way! The disciples made it all up. They were lying through their teeth." Professional historians are not so dismissive, though. They might not believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but they will accept certain core historical facts. And they're not going to be quick to say that the disciples made it all up, or some such rot. What are these facts that Habermas and Licona identified? Well, the 4 main facts are as follows. First, the claim that Jesus really did die on the cross. Now, that's very elementary, but there's just no good reason to deny it. It's too well attested, both by authorities within the church, the apostles, for example, and by secular sources like Josephus. Fact number 2. Even skeptical historians who specialize in this field admit that disciples believed they had seen the risen Christ. They genuinely believed it. In other words, they weren't making it up. Why do these historians, including the skeptics, acknowledge this? Well, because the disciples claimed they had seen the risen Christ, and because they acted as though they had seen the risen Christ. The strongest evidence of this is the fact that the disciples were willing to suffer tremendous pain, persecution, suffering, and even death for the sake of the gospel. Josephus, for example, records that Peter and Paul went to their deaths. And certainly, even when we were active preaching the gospel, at that time, preaching the fact that Jesus Christ rose from the dead was enough to court the death penalty under Nero. Again, this is recorded by both secular and Christian sources, which is why historians just don't doubt that part. Fact number 3, the conversion of Saul of Tarsus. Saul of Tarsus went from being a persecutor of the Christian faith to one of its foremost heroes, a leader within the church, at which point he was known as Paul. Why do historians admit this to be true? Because there's just too much evidence, both secular and religious, including Saul's own testimony. The evidence is just overwhelming. Fact number 4, the conversion of James, the brother of Jesus. The Gospels record that James was a non-believer at first, and even skeptical historians admit this part to be true, even if they reject the rest of the Gospels, because this is something that would have been embarrassing to the Gospel writers and to the cause of Jesus Christ in general. And when a source admits something that's embarrassing to themselves, historians generally accept it to be true and reliable. Because people generally don't record stuff that's embarrassing unless they have good reason to do so. Ancient creedal material records that the risen Jesus appeared to James, and a variety of sources attest that James became a leader within the Christian church, a prominent leader, in fact. So we need something that will account for all four of those facts: the death of Jesus Christ, the belief of the disciples that they had seen the risen Christ, the conversion of Paul, and the conversion of James. Let's throw in a bonus fact: the empty tomb. Now, you don't have quite as many scholars admitting that the tomb was found empty. However, 75% of them do, and this includes some very skeptical scholars indeed. Habermas and Licona explain why these scholars admit that the tomb was found empty and what the historical evidence for it is. But let's just say that we'll throw that in as a bonus fact, not requiring it for the case for the resurrection. Habermas and Licona then proceed to dissect the various theories that have been proposed in order to explain all this evidence away. They talk about the theory that the apostles had merely hallucinated everything, for example, and that's how they came to believe that they had seen the risen Christ. Well, that theory doesn't work, because hallucinations don't work that way, and you can't expect people to hallucinate in quite the same way, nor were they in the right state of mind to hallucinate in this manner. Or the claim that it was all a legend, that it was legendary development, like a great big game of telephone tag. Well, no, that doesn't work either, because the disciples genuinely believed they had seen the risen Christ. Not to mention that any theory you come up with should explain away how the Apostle Paul came to be converted, or how James came to be converted, and so forth and so on. Now, obviously, we won't have time to dissect all of these theories in the course of this video. I do recommend that you buy a copy of the book. Don't just buy a copy. Buy several copies and give them away. It's that good. The endnote section, for example, is extremely thorough, documenting all these historical cases, documenting where the evidence is strong, where the evidence is weak. Habermas and Licona are remarkably honest in that regard, and I love that about them. Oh, by the way, there's even a little bonus CD within the book with a video game that will test you on your knowledge. In other words, help you gain mastery of the subject matter. This is just a remarkable resource, and I'm disappointed that more people don't know about it. It's the sort of thing that Christian bookstores should have prominently on their shelves, and I wish they would. You know what? Maybe if we spread the word about this, if you have more people studying it, maybe they'll get to that point. Get a copy, build a course around this book at your own church. I don't think you'll regret it.